Last time on Darkcore Frontiers. The young Zraynian stowaway Nex finds himself at a crossroads. Planning to run when the Nebula Nighthawk makes planetfall, he discovers the true nature of Captain Grimhelm's plan to steal dangerous Darkcore shards, and realizes he must act to prevent potential galactic catastrophe. Nex devises a shaky plan. As the Nebula Nighthawk nears its next destination, he races against time to warn the Space Authority. Darkcore Frontiers, Season 1, The Stowaway, by Thomas Chase. Chapter 9, A Dance with Devils. Nex followed Legatron to the bridge. He tried to look calm and determined, but inside he felt anything but calm. Part of him was kind of glad he hadn't seen much of Captain Grimhelm on this trip. But then again, maybe if he had, he wouldn't be so nervous about facing him now. Give him a gadget to fix or a tech problem to solve any day. But talking to an actual person who might see right through him, and hearing unconvincing lies pouring out of his own mouth, that was way scarier. He was no good at lying. In truth, if Nex could have bolted right then, he probably would have. But as he had told himself 100 times, he had to stick with it, had to see it through. He looked at DC hovering beside him. Just seeing him there made him feel a little better. Nex was surprised to find the bridge cleared and strangely quiet. The solitary skeletal form of Captain Grimhelm sat silhouetted against the vast starfield. His pinprick eyes pierced through Nex as the door slid closed behind him. Don't mess this up, Nex. Don't mess this up.
You wanted to see me, Captain?
Nex's voice wavered.
Ah, our young stowaway.
Grimhelm crackled.
I trust you haven't found the Nebula Nighthawk an unpleasant deviation from your luxurious lifestyle.
No, Captain. It's been way better.
First Mate Slime's been extolling thy virtues in the laboratory. It seems my gut feelings about you were true.
Thank you, Captain.
Nex nodded. Captain Grimhelm leaned forward.
We're at a crossroads, you and I. I'm willing to take a chance on you. The question is, do you have the spine to go all in with me?
This was the part Nex had been dreading. He swallowed hard, then nodded.
Yes, Captain. I'd like to stay.
It sounded so fake he was sure Grimhelm was going to see right through it. Grimhelm paused. The lights in his eye sockets intensified.
Good. Now keep it together. This is no picnic we're headed for.
Nex blinked. He tried to look eager, but not too eager.
Okay.
It will demand every scrap of your skill, every ounce of that keen intelligence you've been trying so hard to hide.
There was a hint of amusement in the captain's voice.
But for those who prove their worth, the spoils are substantial.
Nex didn't want any part of this, but he couldn't let that show.
Spoils?
Grimhelm chuckled, a disturbing mechanical sound.
We're talking about big credits. Fancy gadgets that'll make your little floating trash can look like last year's model.
Nex took a deep breath. He met Grimhelm's gaze.
Whatever you need, Captain. I'll give it my best shot.
Grimhelm's eyes bored into him, searching. He nodded.
Wise choice. You'll find life aboard the Nighthawk far better than crawling around in the shadows.
Then pausing, he aimed a bony finger at Nex.
But if you double-cross me, I'll make you wish you'd never left thy lowly birth hole.
He turned to the console and spoke into the microphone.
Helmsman Shears, prepare for planetfall.
Nex let out a huge sigh. Well, he had made it through that hurdle. Through the viewport, a darkened orb hung against a backdrop of unfamiliar stars.
Mordrax IV,
Grimhelm announced.
welcome to the Void Marches.
Night engulfed most of the planet, except for the far curvature, where a strip of gold spread across a patchwork of plains and mountain ranges. The dark fabric of Mordrax IV was sewn together with threads of artificial light. As they descended through the atmosphere, Nex caught glimpses of ramshackle settlements clinging to cliffsides and wide open pit mines scarring the landscape. The Nighthawk swept down through rainy skies towards the colossal Mordrax IV Spaceport, a twisted maze of mismatched materials and architectural styles that seemed to shift and reconfigure even as they watched. Garish neon signs in a dozen alien languages buzzed, advertising all sorts of sketchy black market robot parts and weird alien drugs. The Nighthawk glided into one of the less reputable docking bays. Its entrance was hidden behind a facade of misshapen metal and debris. As the ship settled onto its landing struts, Grimhelm wrapped himself in an elaborately woven purple cape. He tied it with a golden cord about his neckbone and turned to Nex.
Stay close. I've seen things in the void marches that would blanch thy locks and curdle thy very soul.
He took a deep breath and tried to look cool, but his heart was pounding like crazy. Okay, Nex, you can do this. Just stick to the plan and don't do anything stupid. The airlock hissed open. A blend of scents overpowered Nex's nostrils. The sharp odor of rocket fuel, the sweet rot of alien fruits, and an undercurrent of something metallic and vaguely sinister. The swish of anti-grav lifts, the chittering of creatures, and the constant underlying rumble of the spaceport's engines assaulted his ears. They disembarked, Nex flanked by Ironclaw and Slime. The Luminid scientist seemed to have recovered from his earlier reaction, but as soon as they exited into the open air, his bulbous eyes began to water profusely.
I do hope this trip will not take too long. Who knows what these noxious fumes might do to my delicate sinuses?
Some of the other crew from the Nebula Nighthawk were there too, either heading off to get paid for the last job or going to grab a drink. Grimhelm led the way, his cape flowing theatrically about him.
We're meeting the new recruits at the gravity well. Watch your step. Gravity's wonky in these parts.
As if on cue, Nex lifted off his feet. Ironclaw clamped down on his shoulder. The engineer's gravelly chuckle rumbled.
First time in fluctuation zones, eh, Squirt? You'll get used to it.
Grimhelm strode off at a brisk pace, his cape floating behind him like a great purple bat. They began a dizzying journey through rain-wet, crooked streets and dark blockhouses. The walls themselves seemed alive. Panels slid and rearranged as the spaceport adjusted to the ever-changing flow of traffic. With his long legs and shadow-like movements, Nex had to sprint to keep up with Grimhelm. Bony children with smeared faces watched from black corners and small gaps between the buildings.
We have to go through the refugee quarter of the spaceport. Not all who live in the marches are outlaws, but they've all got one thing in common. They don't like the space authorities sticking their nose where they don't belong.
Nex nearly fell down when, crossing a little stone bridge, a third-story window flew open and a pair of muscular woman's arms threw a paper bundle of greasy innards into the canal. He was even more startled when what appeared to be a man thickly covered in black goo rose sideways from the water, snatched the bundle, and rolled back under, leaving only a trail of bubbles. Nex stepped into a towering four-armed creature selling tiny, brightly colored lights that floated around in glass jars. Pink and blue and green. They jumped out and landed like snowflakes into Nex's hair and down his shirt.
Do watch where you're walking.
Slime scolded, gathering the lights for the creature.
One bad step here and you'd be dissolved by some alien aphid, or sucked into a dimensional rift. That'd be most inconvenient for me. Just mind your step.
Finally, they made it to the gravity well. The entrance was guarded by a pair of hulking droids, each towering over 3 meters tall, encased in heavy, battle-scarred armor with pulse cannon arms. The door slid open. The whole place had a gross yellow glow, like when you shine a flashlight through your hand. The walls, once white, were now stained with years of grime and smoke, giving the entrance an almost jaundiced appearance. A green-skinned hostess greeted them, her eyes, large and pupilless, fixed on the group.
All right, welcome to the gravity well. 4 of you, hun?
She asked Grimhelm. She tossed each of them a small egg-shaped device.
Here, take these belts and strap them on wherever you got parts. You're gonna love this, I promise. Just don't crash into the other folks. Or do. Might liven up my shift to see some pinballs bouncing around.
Nex turned the device over in his hands and clipped on the fabric straps. His was a little sticky, and he tried really hard not to think about why. They followed Grimhelm to the threshold between the foyer and the main lounge. The floor ended, opening into a vast cylindrical chasm that stretched up and down farther than Nex could see. Patrons of various species drifted through the air on floating platforms or propelled themselves from one conversation to another. Next thing he knew, Grimhelm floated off, his cape billowing around him as he shot forward. Nex hesitated. Slime gave him a shove from behind, shattering cores. The world tilted sickeningly as Nex found himself suspended in midair. It was like that feeling of missing a step and knowing that he was going to die at the bottom of 18 flights of stairs. Except instead of falling, he just dangled there. Nex flailed around like an idiot, trying to figure out how to work his grav thruster. Finally, he got it together enough to move forward. This was going to be one interesting meeting. He just wished that Green Lady had handed out barf bags along with the eggs. Smoke from a dozen different narcotics created a hazy, dreamlike ambiance. Slime's tears floated up the sides of his face. A discordant melody wove by. It wasn't until Nex spotted the musician, a being composed entirely of moving light waves, that he realized where it was coming from. Grimhelm guided them to a secluded cluster of floating booths, his cape whirling about him like a nimbus. 3 figures were already there, drifting in circles around each other.
Our new recruits.
His voice seemed to be pulled out of the air and dissipate around them.
Specialists for our upcoming acquisition.
The first to propel himself forward was a small, furry creature with cybernetic implants glinting at his temples and wrists. Despite his size, there was a dangerous gleam in his yellow eyes.
Name's Spank, weapons expert. If it goes boom, I'm your man.
Next came a burly Cronin, his craggy, stone-like skin carved with elaborate clan markings.
Tiny. Demolitions.
The final figure regarded them with cool, gray eyes. He was human, or near human, with black hair and a face etched with hard-earned experience. He wore form-fitting flak shield body armor in muted grays and blacks, and a long, dark trench coat.
Rax Jarrex, tactical specialist.
As introductions were made, Nex studied Jarrex carefully. There was something in the man's bearing, a coiled tension beneath his casual demeanor, that set him apart from the others. Grimhelm and Jarrex drifted slightly away from the group, their voices low but intense. Nex strained to hear their conversation over the ambient music.
I want point on this operation, Grimhelm.
Jarrex insisted, his eyes narrowing.
I've got the experience, and I know the layout of the target better than anyone.
Grimhelm fixed Jarrex with a steely gaze.
Now you listen here. This isn't some democracy where we take a vote on every little decision. This is my ship, my crew, and 'tis I who doth command.
Jarrex's laugh was cold and humorless.
Your ship? Your crew? Half of them are new recruits, and you're putting the entire operations in the hands of some untested kid.
He jerked his head towards Nex. The tension between the two was palpable. Nearby patrons drifted away. A glowing, gelatinous being oozed past, leaving a floating trail of bioluminescent beads.
The kid stays and that's final. You got a problem with that? Well, tough cookies. His tech is the key to this whole operation.
Jarrex's hand drifted to the Colt Firestorm at his hip.
Then maybe I walk. Good luck pulling this off without my intel.
For a second, it seemed like they were going to go at it. Then Grimhelm's shoulder bones sagged.
Fine. You'll have operational control on the ground, but I still have final say on the ship. Deal?
A smirk played across Jarex's face as he extended his hand.
Deal.
As the two sealed their agreement, Nex shot a glance at DC. The little bot whirred at his side. With the new crew members in tow, they returned to the Nighthawk. The ship lifted off from Mordrax IV and climbed through the atmosphere. Nex retreated to his quarters and turned his attention to the portable energy converter he had been building for DC. With the few scrap parts he borrowed around the Nebula Nighthawk, he modified it into a handheld EMP device. To anyone just glancing at it, it'd probably just look like some jury-rigged communicator. The next few days passed. Nex did his best to play his part, assisting Slime in the lab and running errands for Ironclaw in engineering. Rax Jarex held daily briefings, going over resource allocation, contingency plans, and team coordination. When he stood before them, he shed his tough grittiness, and his body became loose and animated. He took them through drills to make sure everyone knew their part of the plan inside and out. They broke down detailed plans and schematics of the Aegis transport. The entire ship was a kind of sophisticated vault with security programming integrated into the ship itself. Apparently, Grimhelm had managed to convince Jarex that Nex was essential to pulling this off. But Jarex still wanted a really strong backup plan in case something went wrong. As the heist was refined, details added and removed, Nex's role became more specific. As soon as they knocked out communications across the fleet, Nex and DC were to leave the Nebula Nighthawk on a service shuttle. Nex didn't know much about piloting, so Ironclaw took him through basic instructions on how to get the shuttle to the docking bay. He would be met in the Aegis transport by one of their embedded agents. He would get Nex and DC to a security access point. Once they shut down the internal ship defenses, the agent would inform their strike teams that they could board. After that, it'd be pretty straightforward to grab the shards. But they had to act fast before the Space Authority escort fleet could eliminate the virus and bring their systems back online. Nex went along with the plan, trying to figure out some way of messing it up. But it seemed way too simple. It would not be easy to fake a problem, especially with this agent breathing down his neck. He was counting on his message to the Space Authority. But Nex was starting to get more worried as the plan kept changing, especially with Jarex involved. It was after one of these strategy sessions, as Nex was making his way back to his quarters. A hand shot out from a darkened alcove, pulling him into the shadows. He found himself face to face with Rax Jarex. His expression was grave.
We need to talk. Not here. Follow me.
Nex's first thought was that he intended to take Nex out to get him off the job. Should he sound an alarm? But he thought better of it and decided to see what the tactical specialist wanted first. Nex followed after him through the ship's less-traveled corridors. They arrived at a small closet crammed with cleaning supplies and spare parts. Once inside, Jarex activated a small device. A steady light winked on and off.
Signal jammer. Now we may speak freely.
Nex tensed.
What's going on?
Jarex's stern features softened. Suddenly, his entire form seemed to unfold. Before Nex's eyes, Rax Jarex transformed. His body straightened and became upright and poised. Pounds of flesh and at least 20 years of hard living seemed to slide off of him. His gray eyes lightened and became eager and bright. When he spoke, all of the huskiness was gone, replaced by a crisp, well-educated voice. The transformation was so complete that Nex blinked his eyes hard to make sure he wasn't dreaming.
I received your message, Nex. I'm not, as you may have surmised, the individual known as Rax Jarex. My real name is Captain Oron Starling, an undercover operative in the employ of the Space Authority.
Nex's mind reeled.
Wait, you got my transmission? But how'd you figure out it was me?
Believe me, Nex, I have in my possession a comprehensive profile on every person aboard this vessel. With one notable exception. yourself. I have been observing your movements with great interest. It became abundantly clear to me that you alone possess the motivation to dispatch such a message.
But how did you
arrive here so quickly? I was already embedded in the criminal networks of the Void Marches when your distress call came through. It was a trifling matter to position myself as the tactical specialist Grimhelm was seeking.
Tension melted away as a spark of hope filled him.
Then the Authority knows about the heist? Does that mean they're going to shut this whole thing down?
Starling's expression darkened.
I'm afraid next that the situation is not quite so straightforward. Your information was received, but, well, let us say that those in positions of power are not treating this threat with the gravity it demands.
Nex's stomach dropped.
What do you mean?
Starling sighed.
Budget constraints, politics, territorial disputes. Who is to say? There is, however, some good news. A support fleet is to be dispatched, but I fear it is more a gesture of appeasement than a genuine attempt at intervention. The Aegis transport, I regret to inform you, maintains its present course, unaltered.
Nex shook his head. This couldn't be happening. The Space Authority was supposed to step in to stop piracy. They had acted fast on a supply fleet distress call, so why weren't they taking this seriously when he had given them all the details of the heist plan?
There's got to be something we can do. We can't just sit here and let Grimhelm get those shards.
Agreed.
Starling nodded.
Which is precisely why I stand before you now. Why we may lack the full support of the Authority, we're not entirely without resources.
He pulled out a small, encrypted data chip.
This contains updated security codes for the Aegis transport systems. When the moment arrives, I want you to do exactly as originally planned. However, upon accessing that control panel, are you able to upload this data into Aegis Transport's mainframe?
Nex nodded.
Yeah, I can do that.
He took the chip.
Good.
Starling's eyes gleamed.
Leave the rest in my hands.
Nex narrowed his eyes.
There's one other thing I should probably mention.
What's that, Nex?
I might have done a little hacking. Nothing big. Just planted some fake information in First Mate Slime's computer to make it look like he was going to double-cross everyone and steal the shards after the hijacking.
Starling blinked.
And these falsified records, they can be readily accessed?
I think so. You should be able to find the backdated messages if you search for them.
Excellent work.
A wily smirk spread across his face.
This is precisely the sort of subterfuge that our Rex Jarex would uncover. Thank you, Nex. We will most assuredly turn this to our advantage. There is, however, another facet to this operation of which you remain unaware. The protection of the convoy, while crucial, is but one aspect of a far greater mission.
What's that?
Captain Grimhelm.
When Starling said the name, his entire demeanor changed, and a profound sense of brooding came over him.
What about Captain Grimhelm?
He must be neutralized. He is the true peril in this affair. Regardless of the other outcomes, if we cannot eliminate Grimhelm, utterly destroy him, we have failed.
Nex nodded, even though he was honestly way more worried about protecting those Darkcore shards than he was about Grimhelm. But there was something ravenous about the way Starling was talking, and Nex didn't feel the need to argue with him.
Now we must depart before our absence is discovered.
Starling clasped his shoulder.
We are united in this endeavor, Nex. Whatever trials may lie ahead, we will face them as one.
As they slipped out of the maintenance closet and went their separate ways, Nex felt a swirl of emotions. He wasn't alone anymore. He had an ally now, and together they might actually have a chance. You've been listening to Darkcore Frontiers. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Wondrous Legends. And if you like this production, you can help us make Season 2 by supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/wondrouslegends. Thank you for listening.